API, the API economy, which has been booming for many years. And there is basically a whole system they need to connect, talk to each other. There is the need to create very sophisticated workflow on top of existing third-party application services. So you need orchestration, you need integration. Now it's a jungle, right? If you think about API first, for example, it's nice, was a nice idea and a good concept, it became a vision, but now it's like an obsession. You know, companies are frantically rushing to try to understand it, to try to use it, to try to get some value out of it. And can OpenAPI make a little bit of help us to find our way in this jungle of tools, application, requirements? Let's see. But before start, I would like to say behind the presentation, there's always a story, right? And this is a story about a developer. And the developer who's, she's wearing hoodies and she likes to listen to music when she codes, right? And she has lots of other interests outside work. So what she doesn't like to do is to waste her time. So, and we want to make sure that developer experience to that make good use of time. Can OpenAPI help doing that? So I'm going to introduce quickly OpenAPI and OpenAPI tools. We'll look at why OpenAPI is very important for us at the end and our way to do APIs. And we'll dive into code generation, so how you can generate working code from an OpenAPI specification. I'm going to do something really dangerous, a live demo. And then we'll close with some remarks on developer experience. That's me. Nice to meet you. I'm Beppe. I'm Italian, based in Amsterdam. My job is to basically make sure that what we do in terms of API and products is truly developer-centric. So that's I spend my time talking to the community, working community. You can find me on some social media, on blogging, and on GitHub contributing to open source project. And this is my employer at the end. We are a financial technology company, start as a payment provider. So when you buy this Christmas, you buy your Christmas ugly sweater, we will be processing your payment. But we also provide our services, embedded financial services and marketplace management. You never see us. We always hidden behind a nice branded website, unfortunately. And but we are global. We are a bit everywhere. And in Amsterdam is the headquarters. The company was founded in Amsterdam, but there are also now tech hubs in Chicago and Madrid, which are growing very, very fast. So let's start. Sometimes they define OpenAPI as lingua franca. I really like that because lingua franca was something come from Middle Age when different countries, different people need to understand each other for a very important need, trading. And that's what OpenAPI does. It creates a human and machine-readable format to understand each other. It was created as part of WordNik, which is an online dictionary, and it is still alive. And there, what's really interesting from the history is that it was created for a developer experience. They needed something that could explain to the developer how to use those API, how to make sense of those. And then eventually it became Swagger, it was taken over, it was donated to the Linux Foundation, and it became a truly open format. And when an open format, an open standard is successful, it is successful when it sparks lots of other initiative and project application. And that's what happened with OpenAPI tools. OpenAPI tools is an initiative which is not affiliated with OpenAPI, but it's built on top of it. And what you can find in the OpenAPI tools on GitHub and on the website, different tools for work with OpenAPI. The code generation, so you can generate working code from an OpenAPI file. That's what we are going to look at it later. Also other tools which are very, very powerful, like validator. You want to validate the OpenAPI specs. Why do you want to do that? There was a really good question earlier on. The OpenAPI file is consistent, but needs to be also valid according to your company and team naming convention and strategy. So you want consistency to be there, and the validator can help you to capture that before you push it out. And also the diff is also very interesting because you can compare with this tool, you can compare different versions of the same OpenAPI files and visualize what's new, what's changed, what's missing. And maybe there is breaking change that you want to know before it gets coded, because it gets released. Now, code generation, it's the most popular tool of OpenAPI tools organization and initiative. And what does it do? You can generate client code, which means the code that will actually call your APIs. But you can also generate what they call server stub. So basically the initial implementation of your web service that received the request. And from there you can use as a mock, or you can provide a full implementation. It supports more than 100 languages, and for many languages they support multiple frameworks. If you think of Java, very, very popular. There are support for Spring, for REST-easy, for Jersey, and so on. You can also generate configuration. It's possible, for example, to generate the Apache configuration from an OpenAPI files. And generate, of course, documentation in various formats, from HTML to Markdown, and so on. You can use that with the client, with CLI, with client. You download different platform and use it. Or you can use in Docker, nice way to use that system on different platforms. If you are work with Java, but you are in luck because it's a Java project, so you can check out the code, build it from scratch, use the jar, or use one of the plugins provided for the most popular build tools. Now, at the end, OpenAPI is very important. We adopted a long time ago. We still work with it. So it's quite an extensive pipeline, which is quite simplified here. And everything starts from the internal repository, where we have source code, lots of source code, that gets annotated to describe which endpoint you want to offer, the model, the attributes, and so on. And eventually, it goes through an OpenAPI generator and becomes magically an OpenAPI files that is published on GitHub. Now, I work with the external community, so my friends are the developer out there, right? So I like to say I get in action when the files are finally on GitHub. But that step to get there is actually not a simple step you see on this diagram. It's a very complicated pipeline, which involves understanding business requirement, understanding technology, working with the policy organization. If you are interested in this part, well, you are in luck because the team who's developing that is in the room. So if you want to find more, find me later. I'll introduce to this pool of talent engineers. Let's go back to the GitHub. So the files are now on the public on GitHub. What do we do with it? We have three use cases we identified. So one, we push them, make them available for using existing tool. For example, Swagger Hub or Postman. So Postman, very popular tool. What obviously developers like to do, they like to import that OpenAPI files, magically becomes a Postman collection, and you can run your example. You can run the test of the endpoint. You get an API key, of course, so you can actually connect directly to the ADM platform. Second use case is we actually feed them to an application that we developed called API Explorer, where we want to provide a unique experience for developer who work with the ADM platform. So we decided we want to create that, being control that. So we are gonna basically build that, but we wanna feed with the OpenAPI files to be consistent. And here what we did, we use, Isabel mentioned, the extendability of OpenAPI, so you can add custom attributes. For example, extra information about your deprecation policy, or extra information about your example. So that allows us to basically push into the application and a very enriched model that provides all the information developer needs to understand when they work with the APIs. And finally, the last use case is basically we feed those OpenAPI files to our libraries. So we generate from the OpenAPI file the code that eventually become the SDK for our customer. And let's have a look. Here it goes. So this actually is a screenshot of our API Explorer. So where, oops, does it? No, is it? Okay, is it? Oh yeah, okay. So this, where you have an example of the API file gets converted in a UI where you have the endpoints with your example, your documentation, and the header, and you can also run the request response, change the request, test the responses, make sense. So it becomes quite interactive. Now, it's, let's go back first to the developer. You know, the developer that wants to basically be supported by OpenAPI. Before that, I remember that first when I used OpenAPI Swagger for the first time, I remember it was mind-blowing. What do you mean? I put 2 lines of code and I get this user interface with all the endpoints and with all the examples. That's amazing. So now what's happening? See, the developer didn't have anything before, and now we're given a nice, powerful tool. So the expectations are low and the reality is high, and that's where developer experience excel. You want to meet or excel expectation. So we need to keep doing that. Now, if we want to generate code, what do you need to do? You need an OpenAPI generator, and that's okay. It's open source, so we can use it from GitHub. You need to decide if you need the client code or server code, of course. You need to decide which language. There are under-supported languages, so that's a good choice, and which framework for this language. And finally, you need to basically get your template. So OpenAPI generator comes with the default source code template for Java, for Python, you can use, but you want to modify them, you want to control them to make sure the code is basically very close to your policy and your guidelines. Now, let's try to do something now. So this basically is how you generate a Go client. So you start from a YAML file, which is your specification, and you feed it to OpenAPI generator, and you say, please generate a Go client using these templates. So, let's see here. You see, this is an OpenAPI file, a YAML, and what I'll do here, I'm going to generate a Go file. In this case, I'm not going to provide any custom templates. I just want to use the default ones to make sure to show they work. So you get all the templates from OpenAPI, and magically, here I have a Go client already implementing my specification. Now that leads me to the next slide, which is the life of an SDK developer, which is slightly different from maybe the other type of project. So typically when you start with fetching those templates. So I use the default templates, they're fine, but you want to control them. So the first step, you fetch them from the repository, you make a create your local, and then you customize because you want to add some extra code, some utility, you want to reuse existing code. There are many reasons to do that. And then when the magic starts, you are going to generate the code. So from these templates, you're going to generate your code that you can basically use for your SDK or for your server side. And you move into the develop phase. Okay, there's always a little bit of work, of course, after that. The generation does, of course. Classic. Maybe some unit testing, although it can be partially automated. Maybe there is some extra testing. And eventually you develop, test, and release. And that's great. And while you're out celebrating your release, there's a bang, a new version of API. And then you start again. So what you do, you go back and you regenerate the code from the new version. And you see that it will be a new endpoint, a new model, a new attribute, something has changed. And again, repeat. Develop and release. It is possible sometimes you realize that the templates are not ready or they don't have everything you need, so maybe you go one step behind and you customize the template again because something is missing, and you do that and you start generate, repeat, release, and then that's your life cycle. Now let's see this. Now we're gonna try that. We're gonna fetch the template from the OpenAPI repository. We're going to fetch the Java template. We're going to do some modification with it and see what happens. Okay, adjust a simple line. So if I go here, hope you can see there is a new folder, TMP, where I have some templates. I'm going to do something that what we call customization. For example, I import a class that I will have some custom code or some reusable code that I want to use. And then I also want to maybe change the documentation that is generated. This is a platform feature, for example, and then maybe I can go deeper and deeper, and then I can modify the actual method body, because here I want to do for each method or each employee, I want to check the API key. Oops. So now I have my template modified, and what I have to do, I just have to basically regenerate. Go to the next step where I'm gonna use those templates to generate the working code. So again, there's a lot of parameters because we need to set some extra information, but what really matters here is we tell the generator, I want a Java code, use a Spring framework, and I want to use my custom templates. Now the generation has worked, so we are going to open this in different project. Window. So if I look here, now we're gonna browse to some code. And we see something happen maybe. And here what happened is that, yes, we have imported class that we want to use. Obviously doesn't compile now. We have modified our documentation, so that's automatically generated for you. And also in here, in the method body, there will be maybe a line of code that check the API key using your reusable security class. And that's all ready to go. Now we want to use it. Let's see, we need to both remove the code doesn't compile. Okay, we can try to run it. Okay, it's all up and running, it seems like it, and then on go to localhost 1 and magically has created the Swagger interface, but typically all my endpoints now are valid and I can actually start calling them. Okay. So we have fetch templates, we chain them, we run them, it's all work, it's nice, that's how you start. From then, you know, we'd like to share some practices that you come across. And the one is quite, to me, is very important is you don't just generate code, you need to regenerate code. That's very important, you fully or partial automate that code generation as much as you can. So a good design is very important. You go code that you want to regenerate all the time because the API specification will change. And there's a part of the code that you design will be a different area, different package, and instead it remains more under your control, more you change manually. You start with the OpenAPI tools. Good advice is to start with the model. You know, you have those very big JSON payload that you consume. You don't want to create those classes manually. That's really tedious. That's really error prone. So you actually want to generate model. Those model will be Java classes or Go struct. They are different depending on the language. So you start from that, and the next step is it will be to go into service. I want to create actually the client that the code that will perform the request for me for a client. For example, for a client code or the server stub if you are developing the server side. And you can also skip files because OpenAPI generator gives you a lot. You might not want some scripting to push your file into Git, but you also can decide to, okay, some class, the configuration that is generated for me, I don't want that. I want to control that because it really needs to use all my connection pooling, all my security policies. So that's, there's a file called Git OpenAPI generator ignore that you can say, don't bother, I will control this file. And then finally, it's what's actually quite important, in my opinion, is that it's open source. You work with the specification, you work with the tools, you find problems, you can fix them, you can extend the generator, you can contribute back to the project. That's how open source works. We are all in there together. Closing with challenges, the specification evolved very quickly, so you want to generate that code automatically. So make sure you have good design. Templates change. Sometimes you want to upgrade your OpenAPI generator and you realize the templates you customized 2 years ago don't no longer play. bold with that. So what you want to do is a big refactoring. So the advice here is just keep upgrading and stay in line with the OpenAPI generator so you can manage those challenges incrementally. And manual changes. You will always manual changes, will be test or be other code. Just keep that to a minimum. And now to close with a final remark about the developer experience. So we given developer great documentation, we give the snippet, examples, working code. They want more. They want more. So we actually, the key thing is to keep simple and to be consistent. So your code, your generated code, your example needs to be in sync with your OpenAPI specification. And developer experience a feeling that can change. So it's an ongoing investment, and it's the only way today we can make sure that our developer, our friendly developer, he will not be disappointed. And thank you.